In the first week of September 2025, Nepal suddenly became the stage of a youth-led uprising that, honestly, shocked the region and drew global headlines. Known as the Gen Z protests, these demonstrations began with an unusual spark, the banning of major social media platforms, but quickly evolved into a much deeper confrontation. Over corruption, inequality, political dysfunction, and, generational frustration. To understand why the protests erupted, it is necessary to examine both the immediate trigger and the long-standing grievances that pushed an entire generation to the streets. On September 4th, 2025, Nepal's government under Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli announced sweeping restrictions on social media. Platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, YouTube, and X were blocked. After they failed to register with the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology within a tight government deadline. Officials justified the move by citing concerns about misinformation, fake accounts, and cybercrime. But for Nepal's young population, the explanation rang hollow. You see, social media is not just entertainment for Gen Z. It's their classroom, their marketplace, their social space, their job board, and their megaphone. To shut down these platforms was, in their eyes, to attack their freedom of expression, their livelihoods, and their link to the wider world. Almost overnight, students and young professionals poured onto the streets of Kathmandu and other cities. What began as anger over digital restrictions quickly morphed into something far larger, a collective outcry against decades of corruption, nepotism, and broken promises. For years, Nepal has struggled with high-profile corruption scandals. From irregularities in government procurement to misuse of public funds, the perception has grown that politicians and officials enrich themselves while ordinary citizens face rising costs and inadequate services. Many young Nepalese followed such scandals on social media, where leaked documents and investigative reports spread rapidly, yet they saw few leaders held accountable. For Gen Z, the ban on social platforms looked like an attempt not to fight misinformation, but to silence whistleblowers and cover up corruption. A major theme of the protests was the anger at political nepotism. In recent years, children of politicians, dubbed Nepo kids or Nepo babies, have been spotted flaunting wealth, studying abroad, and living privileged lives far removed from the struggles of ordinary youth. When ordinary students face unemployment, rising tuition costs, and the need to migrate abroad for work, images of well-connected elites flaunting luxury struck a nerve. The social media ban ironically drew more attention to this divide because protest slogans and viral posts highlighted the hypocrisy of leaders who enjoy privilege while stifling the voices of those left behind. Nepal's economy has long depended on remittances, with millions of citizens working abroad in the Gulf, Malaysia, and beyond. At home, job opportunities remain scarce, especially for the educated youth. Inflation and rising living costs have only worsened the situation. For Gen Z, many of whom are graduates without stable careers, the combination of economic struggle and lack of opportunity bred resentment. When the government blocked access to tools many used to find jobs, promote small businesses, or learn new skills, the economic frustration merged with the political. Since the abolition of the monarchy in 2008, Nepal has seen frequent changes in government. Coalition collapses, leadership tussles, and shifting alliances have left institutions weak, and honestly, public trust eroded. Each administration promised reform, stability, and prosperity, but none delivered in a way that satisfied the youth. By 2025, Gen Z had grown up seeing political dysfunction as the norm. So, when the social media ban arrived, it was interpreted as yet another betrayal. This time one that directly attacked the generation most dependent on digital connectivity. Gen Z in Nepal, as in much of the world, grew up with smartphones and constant connectivity. They are digital natives who learn, create, and organize online. Unlike older generations, who rely on newspapers, political rallies, or party structures, Gen Z lives in real-time global conversations. The attempt to block platforms therefore felt like a direct assault on their identity and lifestyle. It was not just censorship, it was erasure. And it provoked an instinctive, emotional backlash. The protests began with students chanting for the return of social media, but quickly expanded into rallies denouncing corruption, nepotism, and political failure. Within days, Kathmandu's streets filled with thousands of protesters waving placards, chanting slogans, and sharing live streams through VPNs. Hashtags calling out Nepo kids trended, symbolizing anger against privilege and inequality. Curfews were imposed, especially around the capital, as police tried to control crowds. Security forces clashed with demonstrators, using tear gas batons and rubber bullets. Tragically, at least 19 protesters were killed, and many more injured. Instead of intimidating the youth, the violence actually hardened their resolve. The protests, spread from Kathmandu to Pokhara, Biratnagar, and other cities. What had started as a protest against censorship soon became a nationwide uprising against corruption and misrule. Facing mounting pressure, the Ali government quickly backtracked. Within a week, the social media ban was lifted. Yet the damage was done. Trust between the government and youth had been broken. Several ministers resigned, including the Home Affairs Minister. The protests also forced deeper political concessions. By mid-September, the government announced fresh elections for March 2026, a sign of just how profoundly the protests had shaken the political establishment. Why was it this generation, and not others before, that rose in such force? Well, they had the tools. Social media gave them the ability to coordinate, share, and amplify messages, even in the face of censorship attempts. They had the numbers. With a large share of Nepal's population under 30, their demographic weight translated into political power. They had the urgency. Unlike older generations accustomed to waiting, Gen Z felt they had no time to waste. Their future was being stolen by corruption and mismanagement. They had the clarity. By focusing on corruption, nepotism, and inequality, they framed the protests in terms everyone could relate to, not just students. The Gen Z protests in Nepal have already left a mark. Digital freedoms reaffirmed. The government was forced to reverse the ban, proving that connectivity is now a core democratic right. Youth power acknowledged. Leaders realized that ignoring or silencing the young comes at great cost. Political accountability pressured. Ministerial resignations and the announcement of early elections show that the protests changed the political landscape. Regional ripple effect. Other South Asian governments are watching carefully, aware that their own digitally native populations may mobilize in similar ways. But, the long-term outcome remains uncertain. Will the protests lead to deeper reforms, or will political elites regroup and attempt to suppress dissent once more? Will elections bring in new leadership responsive to youth demands, or just recycle the old? The Gen Z protests in Nepal were not simply about social media. They were about dignity, opportunity, and honestly, the promise of a better future. The attempt to silence young voices by cutting off digital platforms only revealed how much those voices matter, and how deeply they are tied to the fight against corruption, inequality, and political failure. This movement was born in the streets of Kathmandu, but its message resonates far beyond Nepal. A new generation, armed with smartphones and a determination for justice, will not remain silent. When governments fail them, they will rise. And when their freedoms are taken, they will fight to reclaim